Okay, hi everybody. Hello. Hi. Hi, hello. Is this working? Hi. Hi, I have a very long introduction, so we have to get started. It's my great honor to introduce today's Ecology Center seminar speaker, Dr. Holekamp, sorry, I'm shaky, who is a pioneer of integrative behavioral ecology and a distinguished professor at Michigan State University. Dr. Holekamp is the preeminent authority of the spotted hyena, a status she earned through her 35-year study of wild hyenas in Kenya. So I just want to take a moment to pause and think about that for a minute. She's been leading continuous data collection twice a day, every day, for 35 years of wild hyenas. She has insight into the lives of thousands of hyenas across dozens of generations. And this monumental accomplishment has involved training hundreds of students, interns, and field assistants, securing uninterrupted extramural funding from the NSF and NIH for 35 years. This effort has paid off in spades. Not only has Dr. Holekamp's research revealed the complex and fascinating world of hyena behavior, data from her long-term study have been used to advance the fields of behavioral endocrinology and evolutionary biology. She's used her hyena system to answer questions related to animal cognition, developmental biology, host microbiome interactions, ecophysiology, and conservation in well over 200 peer-reviewed publications. Her research has earned Dr. Holekamp numerous accolades, including her recognition as a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Distinguished Animal Behaviorist Award, the Merriam Award from the American Society of Mammalogists, and she's a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Michigan State University Distinguished Faculty Award. She's also been featured in National Geographic, the New York Times, and a children's book written about her called The Hyena Scientist, which I learned about when my 6-year-old pulled it off the shelf in the Logan Library. However, these awards pale in comparison to the admiration and respect that Dr. Holekamp has garnered from trainees, colleagues, and collaborators over the years. This is where I'm going to go. On a personal note, I can say that with 100% certainty that I would not be where I am today without having had the experience of learning from her. Dr. Holekamp was my introduction to scientific research when I started working in her lab as an undergrad and then as a research assistant more than 25 years ago. I know, how does it seem? She taught me about behavioral observation methods. She helped me understand what makes an important research question. And most importantly, she introduced me to Platt's principle of strong inference. She has always been incredibly kind and patient, even that one time I got her Land Cruiser stuck in a ditch. She has for many others, as she has for many others, Dr. Holekamp gave me the opportunity to grow as both a scientist and as a person, and forever changed the path I took in both life and career. I still to this day regularly reflect on the rigor, creativity, and generosity with which Dr. Holekamp approaches behavioral research. She is without question the gold standard and sets the bar for the rest of us. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Holekamp.
Right back on. Yeah, okay. Okay, got it back on. Okay. Anyway, Karen was one of my very best undergraduates ever. And we've never had so much fun on my study abroad class as the year she went, because she was just a hoot the whole time. It was really fun. Anyway, thanks a lot, Karen. You've had a big effect on my life as well. So it's reciprocal, and so is the admiration, because I can't begin to do what you do, which is really awesome. Okay, well, anyway, today I want to tell you a little bit about some work that we've been doing on evolution of intelligence. And I want to first define intelligence for you as these processes by which organisms obtain and retain information about their environments and use that information to make adaptive decisions. So I like this definition. It's from Al Campbell's work. And I like the definition because it applies equally well to robots and rodents and humans and whatever. Anyway, we know that these processes are mediated by nervous systems that vary enormously in size and complexity. And so if you think about brains in a comparative context, you realize suddenly that despite the enormous metabolic cost of neural tissue, that mammals have invested hugely and may have very large brain to body ratios, much larger than in any of the other taxonomic groups. And relative to other animals, including most mammals, we find that primates have relatively large brains. They have a large cortex and sophisticated cognition. So the question that piqued my interest was, well, why should that be? And primatologists have actually given this quite a bit of thought. And these are some hypotheses that have been generated over the years to try to explain the evolution of intelligence. And the first is sort of based on observations like Jane Goodall's of tool use in chimpanzees and other primates that referred to as the ecological intelligence hypothesis, which says that big brains and great intelligence evolved from selection favoring cognitive traits needed to find food and remember where food is and use tools and to hunt. So it's resource-based. Then the second hypothesis is referred to as the social complexity hypothesis. And this suggests that large brains and great intelligence evolved to cope with social complexity. And what effectively it's saying is that instead of engaging in physical aggression like these baboons are doing, if you can actually manage to anticipate and outwit and perhaps manipulate your group mates, you could save yourself potentially wounding or potential death. And then a third hypothesis that's been proposed relatively recently is called the cognitive buffer hypothesis. And this suggests that large brains and great intelligence evolved to help animals cope with novel situations and novel and unpredictable environments. So as you see that these monkeys are having to figure out how to cross this busy street in India. So we were working with these animals that lived in a monkey-like social system. And so we started out by trying to test predictions of the social complexity hypothesis. And if indeed big brains and great intelligence favored in primates were favored by social complexity, then because the hyenas live in, well, they're one of several animal species that live in primate-like societies, but they ought to exhibit cognitive abilities that are convergent with those in primates. So we started working on this in the early 1990s. And so let me just tell you a little bit about their social groups. These animals live in big social groups called clans, containing up to 120 individuals, and all the individuals in the clan know one another individually. Together they defend a common territory, and they rear their cubs together at a communal den. But the societies of spotted hyenas are totally unlike the societies of any other carnivore you can imagine. Any of these creatures or any other carnivore, they tend to live in relatively small groups, and the members of at least the same sex tend to be quite closely related. That is not what's going on in hyena society at all, which looks a lot more like a baboon or a macaque society than any other carnivore. So these groups, in contrast to many other carnivore societies, the groups are comprised of both kin and non-kin. And so I think that just by itself complicates social interactions. But what we see over the years is that within group relatedness tends to be quite low in spotted hyena society, as it is in baboons. We have multiple overlapping generations living in any given clan. We have multiple adults of both sexes. We have male dispersal and female philopatry. And the clan actually contains many matrilineal kin groups. And most importantly, the societies are organized by a hierarchical dominant social hierarchy. So in all these respects, group size, composition, and structure, they've evolved convergently with the primates. So that suggests that we ought to see other convergencies. And yet, if you want to stay within the mammals, this is a really good system in which to test the social complexity hypothesis, because these animals last shared a common ancestor somewhere between 90 and 100 million years ago. So we work on these animals in the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya, and we've been doing this since 1988. And this is a habitat that looks like that. It's right at the equator, so it's open rolling grassland, lots of sunshine that supports lots of grass, it supports lots of herbivores, and so there are loads of mammalian carnivores there as well. And as I mentioned yesterday, we work in this park just on the border with Tanzania. It's the northernmost part of the Serengeti ecosystem. And as I'll show you later on, this river that runs north-south through the park divides it into two management districts. This is managed by one group, and this is managed by another. And we work with 3 groups on each side of the river under each management regime. So we know every one of our study animals in all of our 6 study clans based on their unique spots and ear damage. And we spend 3 or 4 hours every morning and again in the evening sitting in cars like this one, to which the hyenas are very well habituated, and they just do their thing in front of us. And one of the things that we've recorded very religiously over the years is any kind of agonistic interaction like you're seeing here. This is a low-level fight between Cochise and Oliver Twist. And Cochise has just brought her new black cubs to the den. They're both named before we knew their sexes, so of course they have male names. But anyway, this Oliver Twist is very interested in Cochise's little black cub, and Cochise is lunging up out of this hole with her ears cocked forward, eyes wide open. If her butt were out of the hole, you could see her tail's going to be up and bristled. Oliver Twist is doing the exact opposite. You can see her body language is very similar to what you find in dogs and cats, right? They put their ears back, make themselves small, put her tail down between her legs, crouch down and bend around in a very classic hyena appeasement posture. And because Oliver Twist is exhibiting submission in response to Cochise's aggression, we refer to Cochise as the winner in this fight and Oliver Twist as the loser. And because we've recorded these religiously over the years, many years, we now have many tens of thousands of agonistic interactions in our database. And what that allows us to do is generate a very clear picture of the social structure in any given time period. So here I'm collapsing a period of a couple of years, and I've dumbed this hierarchy down. I've taken out about 50 hyenas here between Bailey and Midget. But what we've done is to organize these animals based on the animal who can win against the most others in the society, down to Boston, who can't win against anyone else. Very sad place to be in hyena society. And what you see, the numbers in the matrix represent the number of agonistic interactions we've seen where there was a clear winner and a clear loser. And you can see that there are very few outcomes of social interactions that are inconsistent with the hierarchical positions that we've assigned to them. And this is very much like what you'd see in a baboon or a macaque society, except that these are the breeding females and these are the breeding males. So males in hyena society, you just don't want to be one. It's not a good place to be. But the new cubs slot into the hierarchy. So if Moonpie here has babies, they'd slot in between her and Navajo, and they can dominate everybody lower in the hierarchy than she can. And because we have these different matriline's within the clan, we find that both matriline's and individuals have ranks. So you find in the alpha matriline, which tends to be the largest, they have the best reproductive success. They're all organized at the very top of the hierarchy. Then comes the beta matriline all the way down here until the last matriline, and then come all the immigrant males. And when a male disperses, he slots in from wherever he was up in this part of the hierarchy, goes to a new clan, and he slots in at the very bottom of the hierarchy. And just one more sort of background fact, which is the life history of these animals. The female goes off and gives birth to a litter of 1 or 2 cubs in an isolated natal den. When the cub's about a month old, she picks it up and brings it to the clan's communal den. Here's a typical communal den scene. Here, they stay at the communal den until they're, in our area, 9 or 10 months old. Then they start traveling around the home range with mom. And when they're on average 13 and a half months, they're weaned, which is a very long nursing time for a carnivore, by the way. And then at 24 months, they become reproductively mature. Then females spend their whole lives in their natal groups. So they start breeding eventually. And the same relationships that they made back here are the ones that sustain them for their whole lives. Meanwhile, almost 100% of males disperse, and if they're lucky, they become socially integrated into a neighboring clan and may be able to achieve some reproductive success there. They can live as long as 26 years, at least in the wild. So let me show you this. I'll just talk while you're seeing it. These animals, in contrast to most cercopithecine primates, these guys live in what's referred to as a fission-fusion society. And here we've got GPS collars on. This is a pilot study we did with 6 individual females. We put these collars on that transmitted a signal every second for about a month. And you can see them going apart. They go apart and then they come together. So the den at this point is right here. You can see them coming. Everybody socializes at the den, then they go apart, come back together, and so forth. So it is, there are 70 hyenas in this group on average, but you often find individuals by themselves. Okay, so as in many primates, we find that spotted hyenas live in these groups to solve ecological problems, and yet they still have to cope with within-group competition. To deal with that, they typically go off alone. The average hunting group size in spotted hyena society is 1.5 individuals, so they're often hunting by themselves, sometimes with another guy, even though hunting with a second animal increases your hunting success by 19%, so it's not trivial. But then they band together in big groups to actually engage in what we refer to as clan wars at a territorial boundary with the neighboring clan, or interact with their arch enemies, which are lions. And we know that rank it's not genetically inherited in hyenas, but it's learned during early development. And we know this because we conducted what we euphemistically called bone tests at the communal den when there weren't any older hyenas present. You can see this is not a bone, it's a whole roadkill gazelle that we found. And what we do is put it out by the den when there aren't any adults present late in the afternoon, and stop the test when somebody older arrives at the den. But you can see these cubs, even though they're all still nursing, they like meat. And so they come racing out of the den hole, which is up there, and come over here, and then they compete amongst themselves just like grown-ups do. So we're trying to simulate this competitive feeding situation that you find in grown-ups. And here's what happens if you actually, for example, we gave this test to at two different times to this cohort of 14 cubs. And what we're doing is ranking these animals based on wins and losses here and plotting that against maternal rank on the x-axis. And as you can see, when they're first brought to the communal den, there is no relationship there. It looks like scrambled eggs, right? But after only a few months at the communal den, it starts to fall out in a very linear fashion that becomes isomorphic with the rank relationships among their moms. So this is a learning process. Okay, and so patterns of resource competition also are primate-like insofar as outcomes are determined by social rank. And that has profound consequences for their reproductive success. So the more food you get, the more babies you have. And here we go. As in many primates, we find that everybody breeds in these, all the females breed in the society, but their reproductive success is varying enormously with social rank. So you can see in that top scatter plot that we're looking at offspring produced per year as a function of rank. And we use the same primate-like conventions of having high rank be number one, low rank is actually the higher numbers. But you can see that the low rankers are producing many fewer offspring per year, and they start breeding at a younger age, so that there's a double whammy there where they're actually getting almost a double bonus. But you can see that here's the daughter of the alpha female. She actually has her first litter, which is what's plotted here. When does she first give birth? When she's less than 30 months of age. And this is the daughter of the lowest ranked female, and she starts breeding when she's 6 years old. So really quite a profound difference. And that has profound effects ultimately on fitness. So here what I'm showing you is the descendants of the original animals present in this clan in 1979, when another guy started working with our first study clan. He did his PhD work on them. He went out there and found these 19 females there that he could rank order in the same way that we do, using aggressive interactions. And then what I'm showing you here is the representation of their progeny, their descendants in the clan over 40 years. So what you can see is that even though everybody's equally represented back in 1979, there are only descendants of 4 matrilines, 4 females left in 2019. And the gray triangles here represent extinctions of entire matrilines. So it's a profound improvement in fitness if you can improve your rank. So as in both Sarcopithecine primates and hyenas, we see group size and composition and structure are the same. A lot of their life history patterns and social development are the same. Rank determines priority of resources in the same way, and there are fitness consequences of social rank too. So we wanted to ask, okay, well, given all those similarities, are there also similarities in their social cognitive abilities? And short answer, yes, there are. But I'm just going to summarize about 20 years worth of work here in a couple slides, show you. What we have found over the years is that all the hyenas can recognize each other individually, and they do that using multiple sensory modalities. They reconcile after fights like primates do to repair social relationships. They engage in kin-biased associations and nepotistic interactions, and they recognize paternal as well as maternal kin. And I just want to show you the kinds of things we do to find this stuff out. So here we're running a playback experiment. We're trying to mimic an experiment done by primatologists with vervet monkeys. And so we've got speakers that are hidden from the hyena here. The hyena is about 100 meters away. And we went out and recorded all the distress vocalizations of a lot of different cubs, and then came back and played those to either individual or groups of hyenas to ask whether the mothers recognize their own cubs' voices rather than over the voices of other cubs. And they sure do. So we find that we just looked at crude coefficients of relatedness here, just looking at the time spent looking back at the speaker. And you can see that, once you get over here, they're spending a lot of time looking at the speaker. But this is the really funny part where the animals who are unrelated to the cubs waste absolutely no time looking for it, whereas the animals who are related to them, on average by 50%, spend a lot of time looking for it. So they clearly understand who's their cub based on their voices. They also join forces to accomplish social and other goals. They recognize third-party relationships based on both rank and kinship. And third-party relationships are where, I have a relationship with you, and even though other people in the audience don't know what that, they don't know what that is, they can actually see that there's a relationship here. So that's what they mean by third-party relationships. They track a lot of information about their social environments and use that to make adaptive social decisions. And they recognize that social partners in the clan vary in their value. So they choose who to hang out with based on that. And I just want to give you an example of how we know that. So this is nice work that Michaela Zickman did a long time ago, where she's looking at association index. It's just basically a simple measure of how much time two individuals spend together. And so we're looking at associations between adult breeding males and females. Who do the adult males like to hang out with? And you see the highest association indices here at these high-ranking females and the lowest association. So males prefer to hang out with these girls over here. We have no idea how they know that these girls are more valuable to them, but their reproductive success, as you've seen, is going to be a heck of a lot better than these guys. So it's an adaptive decision to make to hang out with the highest ranking females, because the guys who are hanging out with them are the ones who are going to mate with them. And here's why it's adaptive: because the proportion of cubs surviving, if you're a middle or a high ranking female, high-ranking cub, are way better than if you are a low-ranking cub. So their survivorship is way better. So if you're gonna, inseminate a female, you want it to be one of these girls rather than these girls. Okay, so we're, I just summarized very briefly that we're finding striking similarities in social cognition between spotted hyenas and these monkeys. So we found that the behavioral data are strongly supportive of the social complexity hypothesis. And then we turned our attention to the brain and asked, well, are there convergencies in the brain as well? And this is work spearheaded by my colleague, Charlene Sakai, who's a neuroanatomist. And so the social complexity hypothesis, when applied to nervous systems, is referred to as the social brain hypothesis, and it predicts convergent evolution regarding expansion of the neural tissues that are mediating social behavior. And there are a lot of chunks of the brain that help mediate social behavior, but we're going to focus primarily on frontal cortex here. And this is a monkey brain. These are hyena brains, and you can see that they look pretty different. So this is we called frontal cortex anything anterior to this sulcus here. This is the olfactory bulb. And then what Charlene was able to do was actually put empty hyena skulls from our museum into a CT scanner and actually then generate a three-dimensional image of the brain. And you can then measure the areas of each particular crude chunk of the overall brain. So what we're doing is comparing the overall brain and the brain region. So we have the olfactory bulb. We refer to this mass as the cerebrum. Here's the anterior cerebrum, posterior cerebrum, and here's the brainstem and spinal cord. So we're going to be looking at those things. But it's frontal cortex that ought to be one of the regions affected by this convergence, if there is any. So we started off with a comparison just looking at the 4 extant hyena species. This is sadly the only ones we have left on the planet, and there were as many as 28 roaming the surface of the earth at one point, but not anymore. So this little guy is an aardwolf. It's a little teeny, it weighs about 12 kilos. It's a diminutive little, it's the only surviving descendant of what's a whole clade of dog-like hyenas. And this one actually has evolved to eat termites, and that's what it does. It hangs around all the time and eats termites, and it's strictly solitary except when it's breeding. And then this is a striped hyena, and this is a brown hyena. And these are also, like the spotted hyena, they have the morphology of bone cracking, which means their skulls are allowing them to bite, things the size of your femur with no trouble at all. They can just break it open to get at the delicious stuff inside. But both these animals, striped and brown hyenas, are carrion feeders. And so the artist is showing you that they will make opportunistic grabs at prey, but for the most part, they're eating carrion. And the striped hyenas and brown hyenas live in very similar social groups. Typically, 1 or 2 females will share a den, and a male will hang out with them occasionally. Meanwhile, spotted hyena is the only hyena species that actually lives in these big groups and is engaging in hunting of live mammalian prey. So here's what we ought to see. So we're dividing these three-dimensional brain images into parts, and then we're asking about frontal cortex in particular. So the yellow box is indicating the cortex rostral to the cruciate sulcus, this part here. And so we've got two solitary carnivores and two gregarious carnivores here. And if the social complexity hypothesis is right as it applies to brains, we ought to see that the frontal cortex volume, this area, should decrease in size as we go from spotted hyenas down through these two simpler societies to the solitary aardwolf. And we see some information that suggests that that's what's going on. So here's the spotted hyena here. This is the overall endocranial volume of the skull. And so they have much bigger volumes of the overall brain. Here's brown hyenas, striped hyenas, and aardwolves. And then if you just look at frontal cortex alone, the anterior cerebrum, you find that it really looks like it might really reflect their social complexity, because here we have spotted hyenas, these are brown and striped hyenas, and again, the aardwolf. But the fact is that, these are also consistent with the ecological complexity hypothesis, because these guys hunt live prey, these guys eat carrion, and those guys eat termites. This I can't explain other than by differential social complexity, but maybe you guys have some ideas about it. So what we find is when we look at just adult males and females in spotted hyenas, we find that the overall endocranial volume does not differ significantly between them, but the male frontal cortex is significantly larger than the females. And the females spend their whole lives in this natal group, so they don't have to develop new relationships as they go through life, whereas males will disperse at least once, and about 40% of them disperse at least a second time. So these data are consistent with the social complexity hypothesis. So what we find is that both whole brain and frontal cortex are larger in spotted hyenas than less gregarious hyenas, and the frontal cortex is larger in male than female spotted hyenas. So most behavioral and morphological data are supporting the social complexity hypothesis, but as I mentioned, some are also consistent with the ecological complexity hypothesis. So I need to point out a particular problem with the social complexity hypothesis, which is that individual species with high sociocognitive abilities also tend to excel in general intelligence. So domain general cognitive processes are the ones where you don't repeat the same action 20 times, because if it's getting you nowhere, it allows you to engage in inhibitory control. And so these other, what are referred to as executive functions, are features of general intelligence, and they appear to evolve as well as domain-specific intelligence. So here's how our three hypotheses cope with the problem of general intelligence. So the ecological intelligence hypothesis suggests that general intelligence evolves as a side effect of selection for ability to facilitate coping with complexity in the physical environment. And social complexity very similarly says it's a side effect of selection for favoring social cognition. And the cognitive buffer hypothesis says, no, there should be direct selection favoring individuals with greater general intelligence. So here is an interesting difference that I'm illustrating, in a sort of, funny way, but to me, it tells the story really dramatically. So we've got social problem solving is remarkably similar in these two groups of animals, yet this is something that reflects a fantastic difference in behavioral flexibility. Look at those baboons. This is a car driven into a game park in South Africa, and the baboons were not only interested in what was in that car top carrier, but they've gone in there and taken everything out, and to the horror of the lady in the front seat, they are, tearing it all apart in front of her very eyes. Meanwhile, the hyenas, we know that there are hyenas walking around our tents every night, because we can go out in the morning and see their tracks. And there are other carnivores out there too, but the hyenas are the focus here. So they've got these great big teeth. If they want to get in, they can do this. My students and I, including Karen for a long time, sleep in these little canvas boxes with screen windows, and you don't shut the canvas windows at night. You sleep with them open, and any carnivore can look in there and see you and smell you and hear you. And yet there's a multi-million-dollar safari industry with tourists paying thousands of dollars per night to sleep in little canvas boxes like this without getting eaten. So how can that be? it seems that the hyenas can't think outside the box enough, literally, to recognize you as a food object. But if you were, if you left a banana or an apple or anything sitting on your bed, the baboons would just tear right through that screen and go get it. They're smart. They can figure these things out. The hyenas just don't have the same kind of behavioral plasticity. So we were really interested in this problem of how general intelligence evolves. So we started off, this is one of my former students, Eli Swanson, and he conducted a phylogenetic analysis of brain using Charlene's data, because after she finished with the original 4 hyena species, she moved on to work with a whole slew of different carnivores and put them in the CT scanner as well. So Eli's using brain size as a proxy for general intelligence. And we had CT scans for multiple individuals from all of these carnivore species. And so we have 36 species represented, multiple specimens per species. We knew the sex of each individual. We could do all those measurements of the endocranial volumes plus those individual brain areas. And then we could relate that to the social complexity as described in the literature, their diet and their life history data, and what their sex was. And here's what Eli found. It's really interesting. He used 2 different correction factors because we're using a skull rather than the whole animal, right, to get these data. And so he's correcting on one hand using a correction for overall body mass, which is what is commonly done in the literature, although I don't think it's as good as this one, that you're correcting for the actual size of the skull that you got that brain from, the brain image. And what you can see here is that there's a fair amount of variability, but here's the weasel family, raccoon family, bear family, dog family, cat family, hyena family, and the mongooses. And what you can see, I think, pretty easily is that the Mustelidae and the Ursidae have the biggest brains, even though they are typically solitary. We did find support for the ecological complexity hypothesis when we looked at their diet. So here, again, doesn't matter which correction factor you use in this case. What we're finding is that animals eat meat, have the biggest brains. Animals that are omnivores have next biggest brains, and you clearly don't have to be a rocket scientist to eat bugs. So doesn't matter. So sociality is not working to predict brain size or general intelligence. So we wanted to ask the hyenas non-social questions. How smart are you? How can you do these things? So we went back to the 19th century and built a box just like Edward Thorndike's, only instead of putting an animal inside the cage to get out, we actually put a big chunk of meat inside this little box. It's made of rework because otherwise the hyenas would wreck it in a minute. And so the hyena just has to slide this bolt from left to right. It can do it with its teeth, with its paws. It can flip the box around until the box opens. But so we did 354 trials on 59 individuals from 3 different clans. And here's what we get. Only 9 of all those 59 individuals ever opened the box. So what we're seeing is that there are 3 things that predict whether or not you're going to be able to open the box. The first is how innovative you are, defined by how many different behaviors you try when you first interact with the box. These animals do a lot more of those things, the animals who succeed. They spend more time, they're more persistent, they spend more time working at it, and they have less neophobia, so they're not scared of new things. So still, 9 of 59, not a great score. So we decided we want to expand this and test all these different carnivores using boxes scaled for body size, across all these different carnivore species. So we went to 9 different zoos in North America and tested 153 individuals from 41 species in 9 different carnivore families. And these are the ones that we tested. And here's how we did this. You know how it's sort of complicated to work in zoos because each one's different. And so we tried to minimize variation. We used a box scaled up and down depending on the body size of the carnivore involved. We actually asked the keeper in charge of that particular carnivore, what is that individual's favorite food? And that's what we put in the box. So, we're trying to make it really as attractive for them as possible. And then we had the keeper let the animal out of its home enclosure for a minute while we set up the test apparatus and a camera to record the test, and then the keeper let the carnivore, so, we had everything from bamboo to, whole goats in these boxes. So here's a cheetah being tested, for example. There's a camera set up outside the enclosure, and there's the test apparatus. And we did this, regardless of the enclosure, we did it the same way, where we've got a box scaled down for this ferret. And so we find that success opening the box was assessed in relation to the same variables we were looking at earlier, where we were looking at the same performance measures. How much time did it spend working? How many different behaviors did it try? How neophobic was it? And then relate also their performance to these same variables that we, plus manual dexterity and certain aspects of their neuroanatomy. So I just want to take a minute to actually show you these animals dealing with the box. Some of these animals have, this is their first trial. Some they're very good at dealing with the box already. So this is a red panda going after bamboo. Here's a bintron going after a fish. The bears always seem very slow and deliberate. They did really well. Got it. There's a quaddy. Sometimes they seem so surprised when the box came on. The canid's engaged in a lot of digging, as you can imagine. This box weighs about 50 kilos. This is an early trial for one of the snow leopards at the Lansing Zoo. Now I think this is where it actually learned how to do it. Oh, here it is. We were hoping that we would actually be able to do enough trials so that we could actually plot learning curves for every individual, but the keepers all got really impatient with us way before that happened. The striped hyena, very beautiful animals, but not one of them opened a box. Spotted hyena. This badger's a kick. It's got a bowl full of mealworms in there, and it really wants them. And the box opens, and it doesn't even realize it's open for a while. Oh, cool. A number of these zoos adopted apparatuses like this as enrichment devices after we were done. Okay, so here's a river otter. A fox. There was one zoo where the keepers were nervous about the animals damaging themselves, so we ended up using smaller boxes. Like this is too small for that animal, but they didn't want us to use the bigger one. This is the funniest one. This is the Michigan wolverine. Why is it putting that box in the water? Can't get it in the water. To go, it's a to-go box. So here's some of what we find. We find that, not surprisingly, carnivore brain volumes vary with body mass. No kidding. It's nothing surprising there. But what we found was that proportion of the trials where there was a successful orientation, both increased. If your brain size was getting larger, you got better at solving this problem. But the social species were performing no better than solitary ones, regardless of whether we defined a social species as something as simple as living in a group larger than one, or actually accounting for average group size. So with respect to the social complexity hypothesis, it appears that it might promote convergent evolution in carnivores of social problem solving, and perhaps affects the size of specific brain regions. But it can explain either brain size or the ability to solve non-social problems. So there are many data are consistent with other hypotheses. So more recently, we started trying to test the cognitive buffer hypothesis. And again, this suggests that general intelligence evolved to allow animals to cope with novel socio-ecological challenges, to enhance fitness in changing or novel environments. And this is the city of Mekelle, Ethiopia. You can see it's a pretty big city. There's 500,000 people living there. And well, now there are. When I made the slide, it was only about 300. But they've coexisted with hyenas in the city and a lot of cities in northern Ethiopia, where the local people believe that hyenas eat evil spirits, and so they tolerate them. They don't persecute them like they do in most parts of Africa. And here's what the hyenas eat in these northern Ethiopian cities. They're feeding at the garbage dump, or on offal put out in the streets, or waiting outside a local butcher shop for the butcher to put out their parts that they didn't want. So we've been trying to test predictions of the cognitive buffer hypothesis in the context of urbanization, using urbanization as a form of environmental novelty to which not all carnivores are exposed. So cities are evolutionarily novel, and so we tried to do cognitive testing across a very simple-minded urbanization gradient. So this is the most urban area, and then I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have a town over here that has grown exponentially during the time I've been working in the Masai Mara. So we're going to test animals in this clan, and then we're going to test animals over here too, because these live in a very pristine environment. So these are totally rural hyenas. These are hyenas in an urbanizing area, and then we're also including testing of Mekelle hyenas. And let me show you the change in Talek over the years that I've been going to Kenya. I first went to think about working on hyenas in 1985. This is what the town of Talek looked like then. It's 3 little Maasai villages, have about 40 or 50 people living there. Then in 2009, it looked like this. There had been some buildings built and more people moving into the area. And by 2017, I had to zoom way out. You can see, let me go back one. You can see this radio tower or phone tower in Talek, and now here it is. But I had to zoom out because the town's getting so big so fast. And this is what it looks like today. So it's a booming metropolis, and it really is. And the hyenas in our main study clan in Talek are spending a lot of time here. So what we were doing is comparing performance among these ancestral, rapidly urbanizing and fully urbanized populations. So on the western side of the Mara River, we see this sort of ancestral, stable environment that's really never changed. Many people argue that it hasn't changed since the Pleistocene. I mean, it is beautifully pristine. Then in Talek, we have this rapid urbanization taking place, and in Mekelle, the hyenas have been coexisting with people in a city for a long time. Here they are waiting outside the butcher shop. So we developed a whole battery of tests using a lot of different types of apparatus. We're testing learning, memory, behavioral flexibility, and also executive function. And then we're calculating the animal equivalent of IQ, which is called G, using a psychometric factor analysis analytic approach, and calculating a selection gradient on G in each of these different habitats. So if the cognitive buffer hypothesis is correct, we ought to see that Serena does worse. Talek should do better and have higher G and stronger selection gradient on G. And Mekelle, since they've been living in an urban environment for a while, should be now fully adapted to this and really generally intelligent. But not so much, because here's the Mekelle hyenas on a performance measure on one of the tests, and it was pretty typical regardless of what test we use. But here's the Talek urbanizing population, and here's the pristine one. So urban life might actually be less demanding intellectually for hyenas than life in nature, and they do all scavenging and no hunting. So far, we have not found any support for the cognitive buffer hypothesis at all. Okay, and then coming full circle, the woman who went to McKellar and did, all the testing there, she was using it with respect to this particular apparatus, which is, it's a simple, a version, what do you call it? The hyena is trained on this opaque tube, and it's got a whole bunch of holes punched in it. You can put a chunk of meat in there, and the hyena can smell it through the opaque plexiglass. What do you call that stuff? PVC, anyway, and it has to learn to go around to the end if it actually wants to get at the meat. And then once the hyena's learned it's reached a learning criterion threshold on this apparatus, you swap it out for the clear one. And if you give this to human infants or dogs or pretty much anything, they walk right up to it and bang their nose against the clear plastic. So they, you were interested to know how many trials it takes them to figure out, no, you still have to go around to the end. So what Lily found was that the probability of passing a trial increased with clan size, and also that the cohort in which you grew up also affected the probability of your passing a trial. So it's really pretty neat work. So a question, which selection pressure shaped intelligence in spotted hyenas and other carnivores? Well, there's much behavioral and morphological support for the social complexity hypothesis, and both social cognition and frontal cortex are enhanced in spotted hyenas as they are in monkeys, and group size is correlated with ability to inhibit the wrong response in Lily's test, that last one. And there's some support for the ecological intelligence hypothesis. Carnivore brain size and problem solving are better in meat eaters than omnivores or insectivores. But there's no support to date for the cognitive buffer hypothesis at all. And that is all I'm going to say. I have to show you guys one funny thing, if you can bear with me for 1 minute. We just did this experiment where we put radio collars on every grown-up in an entire clan. So you can see the whole clan moving around in space the whole time that all these collars are working. They work for about 5 weeks. And so our car is this little white triangle. And this is a day where they had forgot to bring the coaxial cable that allows them to use the VHF tracking. Check this out. This is a riot. The car is driving through all these hyenas and it never sees a one. It's really amazing to me that you can be that close to that many hyenas and not see a one of them. Anyway, that's enough. Sorry. So there you go, Karen.
Example of how you use strong inference in your research.
Trying to.
So I've heard you give other talks about the development of hyenas and like why they likely invest so much in nursing, and because of this big carnassial muscle to develop the jaw strength and everything. And I'm wondering, carnassial crest, sorry, it's been a while.
Yeah, sagittal crest is the big tall thing.
So jaw strength and everything, right? And they need time to develop that in order to be able to access, bone crushing behaviors. So is it possible that there are developmental constraints on the general intelligence?
Yeah, I think there are. And I think that's why we don't see, let me go to the skull. Yeah, okay, so, nope, that's not it. Okay, here we have a carnivore skull, here we have a monkey skull. And you can see that we're looking at dorsal views of each one, right? And so carnivore skulls have all these bony protuberances because they need to be able to close their jaws and catch prey and tear it to pieces. So they have this great big sagittal crest, Karen mentioned, great huge wide zygomatic arches, a big strong mandible, and all these bony processes sticking off the skull to which the masseter and temporalis muscle attach. And in a monkey or a human, you got none of that. It's a big round dome. It's free to balloon as necessary as you move through evolutionary time. I guess that was it. But anyway, so yeah, I definitely think that has something to do with it. The fact that, we don't have the same constraints that these guys do. Yes.
Saying that the rank of the females is something that's learned. And I was curious about whether the females always keep their status or if there are situational or behavioral factors that predict them losing status and if that's then passed on to their children, et cetera?
Yeah, for the most part, rank relationships stay pretty stable, but if you get injured, that can affect your ability to maintain your rank. If your matriline size shrinks and you don't have this cohort of allies anymore, that can affect, then lower ranking matrilines can affect a coup d'etat and actually overtake the higher one. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, wow, one of my former students, Eli Strauss, who's about to take a job at Michigan State to replace me, yay, is he's done this fabulous work where he's actually looking at, okay, if a female has consistent and predictable allies, how does that affect her ability to improve her rank? And it has a profound effect. And if you go up even a single notch, a rank position, especially towards the high end of the hierarchy, that can have an enormous effect on your reproductive success. So yes, every once in a while, it's rare, but it does happen where they can change ranks. Yeah, Peter. Well, I'm sorry, are they meritocracies? No. Not so much. No, they're, it's not might makes right, but it's the luck of the draw. Which matriline you get born into is going to have a huge effect on how well you do.
One hypothesis would be, okay, these hierarchies develop, or the cultural evolution works because it's meritocratic and the most fit individuals get in the best position. That's not what's going on. So what's why the cultural evolution of that?
Well, I think, these animals the spotted hyena is really an evolutionary brand new species. I mean, Lars Vertelen, who's the guru of hyena taxonomy and systematics, suggests that they don't appear in the fossil record until somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago. So they're really new. And there have never been any hyenas with a bone cracking morphology before that live in a society like this. You see pictures, if you see pictures in Science or any magazine where they're depicting, Australopithecines, competing with hyenas for a carcass of a mammoth or whatever, they show you this big group of hyenas. And I think they assume that they lived in groups just like modern spotted hyenas do, because you can go to the caves of Europe and find tens of thousands of bones in these caves. And I think that's more because there are very few nice caves than because they were living there in a group. So reasonably confident it's not merit-based, but it definitely, depends on the luck of the draw, how you're born into these societies, that, who your mom is and what kind of network of allies she has that allows you to do well or not. So yeah, in yesterday's talk, I showed you a little bit about the GPS data showing that low-ranking hyenas have to go all over the ecosystem to feed themselves, where the high-ranking ones can always feed themselves within their clan's defended territory. And so low-ranking hyenas not only expend more energy doing stuff like that, traveling long distances back and forth to, if you're a hyena with cubs at a den, you're a central place forager for as long as that cub lives there, right? So, and so high-ranking females have an enormous advantage there. They can not only have priority of access to food when it comes along, but they also expend less energy. So they're winning in a lot of different ways. Yes.
So is there any inherent male rank? Or is it like, do males basically make things egalitarian over time?
No, they
fucking up the rank.
No, males are responsible for most of the gene flow that's taking place, because typically all the breeding males in a given clan have come from multiple other clans. So sorry, but I tried to show that males actually are they really have very little social clout. When they change their clan at dispersal, natal dispersal, if you're the son of an alpha female, you may go from being ranked 2 or 3 in the clan just after your mom and maybe a sister. You can, in a clan of 70 hyenas, and if you move next door to the next clan of 70 hyenas, you're going to be number 70, because you're going to be the newest arrival at that clan. And it's just a matter of a waiting game, a persistence game for these males, who sometimes have to wait years for an opportunity to mate, clearly. But there is some of our colleagues who work in hyenas in Tanzania have found that they looked at reproductive success of sons of high and low ranking females. And in their new clans, the sons of high ranking females are, for some reason, whatever it is, doing better. Again, it's one of those things, we don't understand how that works out. But we did a study where we put VHF collars on 10 sons of low ranking females, 10 sons of high ranking females, and then looked at where they were a year later. All 10 sons of the low-ranking females were dead, and all 10 sons of the high-ranking females had gone to other clans and were at least alive. We don't know how their reproductive success was doing, but something about being raised as a high-ranking son. I don't, if they were humans, I would describe it as they're more self-confident. But that's not something I can actually safely say about hyenas. But they're definitely act different. Thanks, you guys. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, here's what I was trying to get at, like, and maybe this is like egregious group selection thinking, but why, the fact that all these different clans have the same hierarchy suggests that if you got in another clan and it was just a random hierarchy or some other system or more tumultuous and more noble, it wouldn't do as well. Like, there's something about this system that is advantageous. And I wonder if it's some sort of nonlinear averaging, like
Might be.
that-
That's an interesting
like
idea.
the benefit, the success of the few high-ranking ones outweighs the failure of the low-ranking.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting idea. We'll have to talk with this, about this with the students who are taking over the hyena project, because I think that's something I bet they'd be interested to look at. It's an interesting idea, this long-term averaging. But anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you, and have a safe travel.
Thanks, Beth.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I just was curious if the dominance rank had any relationship with their ability to solve, in the hyenas, to solve
No,
puzzles.
none whatsoever.
Nothing, okay.
Age
Probably
didn't
thought about
affect,
it.
yeah, we did. Age didn't
So-
affect it either. So
So it's not